When I sat down to write the script for this episode, I had a plan, but then my dog wanted to go for a walk. And as I tried to navigate around patches of melting ice, trying not to slip and fall, I started to narrate the beginning of this episode in my head, and I began to wonder who really was the catalyst for the narrative that was starting to form around Brock Purdy as the 49ers began their final stretch toward the playoffs. And so my whole plan on how to start this episode completely changed. Because you see, in my opinion, the person who could be seen as the smoking gun for the start of the narrative wasn't this guy. It was this guy. Before we start, once again, I feel like I should start with a disclaimer. I have no ill will toward Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo. Full disclosure, I wasn't necessarily a fan of the team when Jimmy G was a starter or when Lance was drafted. So I'm not going to sit here and be hypercritical about either of them. Jimmy Garoppolo was a passable quarterback for the Niners until he started getting multiple injuries that changed the way he played, and Trey Lance was simply not ready, in my opinion, to be a starting quarterback. With that said, unfortunately for both of them, they are part of Brock Purdy's story, so I do have to talk about them. This episode is also going to be a bit different in terms of how it's structured. While the last 3 episodes focused on 3 specific games, those games were special because of what they represented. Him replacing the starting quarterback, his first official start in the NFL, and his first primetime game as a starting quarterback. For the last 4 games of the season, the Niners as a team really had nothing left to prove. They were the NFC West champions and were in the playoffs no matter what. For Purdy, though, these last 4 games would be his opportunity to show the team and the rest of the NFL what he could do. But as I mentioned in the last episode, many people around the league, the media, and other football fans were starting to ask questions. A narrative was starting to form. So, why do I think it was Trey Lance that was the catalyst for the start of this narrative? For that, we do have to take a quick trip back to episode 1. For many people in the NFL world, media and fans alike, the trade up for Trey Lance is still looked at as one of the worst mistakes a team has ever made in the modern era. In fact, most people thought after he only started a few games the year he was drafted that he just wasn't ready, and the idea of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch losing their jobs over the decision was a distinct possibility. And then the start of the 2022 season happened, and Trey Lance went down with a season-ending injury in week 2, and they would go on to lose 3 of the next 5 games. They made up for the Trey Lance disaster somewhat by securing Christian McCaffrey, but the drafting of Trey Lance was not something people were just going to forget about. And then their only viable backup quarterback went down in week 13. Suddenly, everyone outside of the Niners fandom had a singular thought. Finally, their choices were going to catch up to them. But then, Brock Purdy put on the helmet and stepped into the huddle. And after 3 games, suddenly everyone turned into Jesse Pinkman.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Now, this is strictly my opinion. You could say this is my narrative of the events. But let's break a few things down, and I'm going to do so by bringing up the narratives that were starting to form. First, the Niners got so lucky to fall backwards into Brock Purdy. I probably shouldn't have started with this one, because I actually believe this one is true. Although, can we stop for a second and acknowledge the fact that the Niners have been deceptively good at drafting players in later rounds? I won't name them all, but George Kittle was drafted in the 5th round and as of today is arguably the best or second best tight end in the league. Never mind all the great defensive players that they've drafted in the later rounds. Or how about this one? Brock Purdy can't be good because he was the last pick of the draft, and that had to be for a specific reason, right? If you're watching this and have said that in the past, I want you to know that I agree with you. No quarterback that has ever been drafted in later rounds has ever done anything great in the NFL. In fact, the only thing worse than being a late round draft pick is never being drafted at all. Now that you've got that out of the way, I think it's important to understand that the whole point of Mr. Irrelevant is the idea that it doesn't actually matter where you were drafted. Anyone can make an impact at any time. It's something I wish people would remember. But I get it. No one wanted to believe that Brock Purdy was any good because that would mean that all of the scouts, except for one, were wrong in their evaluation of him during the combine, and that 32 teams, yes, I'm counting San Francisco in this, passed on him 261 times before he was drafted. Now, there are a couple of other narratives that would begin to take shape, but those are better saved for a future episode. So I'm guessing you've been watching the highlights while listening to me ramble on. And so before I end the video, I do want to touch on a few things from each of these games, because they would help debunk some of those future narratives, at least for those people who don't suffer from selective amnesia. First, if you saw the last episode, you'll remember that in the game against the Bucks, Deebo Samuel was injured and would miss multiple weeks. At the time, Deebo was one of the main yards after catch threats on the team, but in the Commanders game, Purdy got to show off the fact that he didn't need to rely on Yak to get the job done when he connected with George Kittle on a beautiful 34-yard touchdown that hit Kittle as he was entering the end zone. After that game, the Niners took on the Raiders, which turned out to be one of the best games of the season, and it went all the way to overtime. Purdy would then lead the team down the field to set up the winning field goal, ending the game 37-34. Why did I mention that? Well, you'll see later. And finally, with Deebo back on the field, the Niners would easily dispatch with the Cardinals. This would be significant for a few reasons. With this win, the Niners would sweep the division for the first time since 1997, they would extend their win streak to 10, and Brock Purdy, the rookie, would remain undefeated. By now, many people were starting to wonder if the Niners were ever going to lose. For most of the season, all anyone could talk about in regards to the Niners was the defense. And let's not take anything away from the defense. They were the best in the league for a reason. But finally, people were starting to take notice of the offense. And now, the rookie that no one remembered in the draft was about to take his team into unprecedented territory. And the first game was against a team that had an advantage against this version of the Niners that no other team had had. They had already faced Purdy once already, so the element of surprise was gone. And now it was time to see if Purdy could do it again. And just like that, the video is done. If you liked what you saw and aren't subscribed, consider doing that now. Also consider leaving a like and comment so that wonderful algorithm stays fed. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.